lot of AI regulation now, we'll talk about what it is really making sure that the technology is being applied to existing regulation. Now, I told you that I was at an insurance company. We were patenting the use of data in AI. Some of it was personal data. But we were keenly aware that, because, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, in the insurance industry, what they did was they took out a red pen and they would draw a circle around a zip code where minorities lived. And they would say, we're not writing insurance there. And the insurance regulators are very, very intent on not allowing that to occur again. But we knew that when we were looking at this back in the 2000s, that we couldn't let that stuff happen, that the regulators would be all over us, we'd get fined, we'd be in big trouble. So, they're highly regulated companies. So we knew we couldn't do that. Same thing with companies doing mortgages and other financial services companies. You just know you can't allow those bad practices to make their way in. And that's actually, so the insurance industry started looking at this back in maybe 2019. Certainly they had been, maybe in 2019, I think they started to take a look at this. So it goes back there. So the regulators were talking about these things back a number of years ago. The thing is that it was being used in very kind of narrow ways. And so they initially, there's some guidance or people were talking about it. In 2022, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners asked me to speak at a conference where it was one of their education conferences. I gave a keynote address on what is AI and how does NIST look at it versus they had come up with their own risk management framework kind of thing. Interestingly, used different words, but it lined up almost exactly. So the concepts had been there for a while. I don't even know exactly how far back they go. Because people were talking about this. We were talking about it in the mid 2000s. So, but the formal regulatory processes didn't start until 2020-ish, during COVID times.
So why do you think the insurance industry was where you were really seeing this? So, I mean, was it the only one, or was it what made them unique?
So, because of those past harms, right? Because they use data, and the regulators know that they're using data to there's allowed discrimination and there is not allowed discrimination. So if you're a bad driver, an insurance company can discriminate against you by pricing you higher or saying, I don't want to do business with you. They can't do it because you're Black. So there's allowed discrimination. That's what insurance is. Insurance is pricing risk, based on risk characteristics, but not on prohibited characteristics. So that's exactly what insurance is. So
Wow,
yeah.
I've never thought about it that way before. And, at risk of sending us down a rabbit hole, I really want to try to understand this concept of, is allowed discrimination, is that a term that's used, or is that just a way of kind of understanding the differentiation?
They don't really use the word discrimination there because discrimination is
But it is what it is.
well, but it's people are usually, so when I talk about bias in AI terms, I try not to use that term really in the legal work that I do, because you can have data bias that does not cause inappropriate outcomes, right?
Sure,
Inappropriate outcome
sure.
being, I'm not going to give a mortgage to a minority person, right? That's an inappropriate outcome. But you could have data bias, and maybe the data bias makes you so that you aren't pricing your mortgage or pricing the insurance correctly, and you lose money, right? Or you price too high and nobody will buy your product. So you can have bias, and I talk about it as inappropriate outcomes. We don't have the language is not perfect on the legal side on this.
That's really wow. That's such a rabbit hole we could go down, and I think, but I think this is something the AI industry is going to go down because I'm all of a sudden thinking that you're right. Even though there's a lot of connotation to the word discrimination, which is interesting also from a language model perspective,
Right.
that if you're a credit card company, and you won't give somebody a credit card because they have a history of default, well, that is from a strict language definition of the word discrimination, that would qualify as discrimination. But we tend to think of discrimination as because of your race, your ethnicity, your gender, those factors. But it is making a decision. It is making a decision. Actually, I guess, what is the dictionary definition of the word
So,
discrimination? Now I'm struggling with that.
yeah, so what we're really talking about is society, and different societies, different countries, different states have somewhat different views on this. That there are things that they consider inappropriate and won't allow companies to do, or individuals to do, or governments to do, right? And in the US and in most Western countries, racial discrimination, discrimination based on sex, is not allowed except where it's actually appropriate. So, okay, in the healthcare industry,
Okay.
there are, sickle cell anemia is African, people of African descent get sickle cell,
Hmm.
others don't. So you can actually, like, if you want to advertise a product for sickle cell anemia, you would advertise to people who are likely to get it, or who might, have that as an issue.
Sure.
And that's considered appropriate. Same thing for women's, uh, medication, or product, other
Mm.
things that where you are not uh, inappropriately discriminating. So we see there's appropriateness and inappropriateness, and the laws do account for that. I'll give you an example of where this comes up. So the New York Department of Financial Services has a new regulation. It's called Circular Number 7, because it's under a bunch of different regulations. And it shows how, if an insurance company wants to use personal information in an AI system, they have to have a governance program, they have to do certain types of testings, they have to comply with a whole bunch of laws. When you start looking at the laws actually talk about this very issue. What type of discrimination is allowed and not?